faces in my mind, put them in a pretty little line for you to see. I try to...
Hello everyone, I'm Joe Collins and this is Dear DM, a Dungeons & Dragons advice podcast where each episode I sit down with a different Dungeon Master in order to discuss, debate, and hopefully answer your D&D related questions. Thank you so much for joining me. Last episode, I teased a little bit about having a legendary DM joining me on the show soon, and we'll have more info on that at the end of today's episode. So if you want to hear your questions potentially answered by one of the greats on an upcoming episode, please submit those questions to us, as always, either on our Twitter at DearDMPodcast or to our email at deardm.submit@gmail.com. Or even in the Nerdsmith Discord channel. Some more exciting news. This next Monday, the 16th of April, is the start of the very first Nerdsmith subscription drive. If you're enjoying the content on the network so far, either from us, or Roll Like a Girl, or Dungeon Maestro, or any of the other lovely free nerdy podcasts coming out of Nerdsmith, this will give you a chance to show your support and get some cool stuff and perks while doing it. Every show is doing bonus content only available to subscribers, and there's some really cool stuff in the works. For Dear DM, we're actually going to be doing a roundtable episode with several of my favorite guests from previous episodes, all together bringing their own questions and asking. So it's going to be a lot of fun. Keep an eye peeled for that, and we will have a lot more info on our next episode as well. Today, I am very excited to be joined by Chris Locke, DM and host of the Nameless D&D podcast, and the lead designer of the Retroverse 5th edition D&D setting. Thank you so much for joining me, Chris.
Well, thanks for having me. Not many people know about the D&D podcast that I do because it's been on hiatus for a little while.
I took a look and I listened. I liked what I heard. It was absolutely enjoyable from what I heard. But I will admit, I did first hear about you through Retroverse. That is the thing that is currently, I imagine, encompassing the entirety of your life.
It's a living nightmare, but a great one. But a really fun nightmare where, like, you know, the nightmares where you're surrounded by terrible beasts, but you're also super powerful at the same time. Yeah, it's kind of like that.
Absolutely. That's wonderful. For those at home who might not know about it yet, why don't you tell us a little bit about the Retroverse?
Okay, so the Retroverse is a 5th edition compatible setting that we are making, and it is basically Saturday morning, the tabletop role-playing game. So you remember how cool Saturday used to be, where you would like wake up and watch cartoons and eat sugary cereal and play with action figures all day, and that's pretty much all you did?
Very well.
Well, that's what we're making. We're trying to make that, or doing our best to make that. Because
that's awesome.
D&D and a bunch of that stuff is like, there's really cool stuff out there, but there's also just a lot of fantasy stuff over and over again. And as much fun as that is, there's just not nearly enough neon. There's not enough lasers. There's not enough laser neon swords. We
neon
need things
dragons.
To be. Yeah, things need to be crazier. There's not enough pizza monsters or robots. And some people have compared it to Shadowrun, which is a fair comparison. But Shadowrun is more about like hacking into giant mega corporations and trying to get enough so that you can go get yourself drunk in this dark dystopia that you live in. And this is not that at all. This is about pizza monsters and going into like old Chuck E. Cheese's that have been taken over by kobolds.
That is wonderful. I'm very excited to see this. You guys have a Kickstarter coming out for it soon, right? Actually, I believe today, as of when this will air, April 10th.
If this is airing the 10th, then yes, our Kickstarter is just launched, and oh my goodness, it's been great.
Already reached 1 million? Oh my god, I can't
believe
it.
I'm crying and also dying.
But I'm really looking forward to that. So what gave you the idea for this? Was it coming about like as a DM kind of looking for more, or what gave you the idea of creating this kind of setting in the first place?
Well, it was sort of like a happy accident. So in my games, I'm always making weird stuff. I'd rather it get a little bit crazy and wonky than have everything be totally serious. We can have serious moments for sure, but there's no reason that everything has to be dark and dreary all the time. There's no reason that, I keep on coming back to pizza, but there's no reason that your taverns can't serve pizza. There's magical dragons and stuff that are 10 billion years old, and you can't serve pizza? There's no indoor plumbing? What is this? This is ridiculous. So, me having that mentality and then coming into, I'd come back to Twitter after a pretty long hiatus and just happened to stumble across the artist on the project, Uis. And he had just been creating some sort of, it wasn't, I don't want to say like just normal fantasy art, because it definitely had a unique flair to it. And I really dug his style. And so I would just start adding in flavor text on top of his stuff. And then like, as I retweeted it, and he really liked that. He liked my writing style and I liked his art. So we kept doing that for a while. And then he played Far Cry Blood Dragon and thought, well, I can draw that. And so he drew that. And then he drew one like lizard-born paladin or something like that, and then drew a neon dragon right after that. And so I threw out 4 or 5 tweets worth of like backstory, like world building sort of stuff, just to have some fun. And somebody went, so can I buy this?
That is awesome.
I was like, yeah, give us 6 months. And so I messaged him that day and I was like, I guess we work together now. We should get started. And we did. And that's where we are now.
That's fantastic. It's always funny how artists find each other. It can happen in the most unexpected ways possible.
Yeah, I absolutely didn't expect any of this.
But yeah, that's awesome. So when did you start? You said before that you've been DMing for about 4 years or so. Is that have you been playing for that long, or is that what got you into D&D in the first place?
So I've actually I've been playing for about 4 years, but only DMing for about 2. Believe it or not.
Only 2 years. That's not much time at all.
Well, I mean, there's people out there that have been doing it for 35 or so, and I feel of like, what am I doing here compared to those people? But I just happened to stumble across a group here, basically, that were getting together, and they were playing all 2nd edition stuff, and so I cut my teeth on 2nd edition. I'd played as a kid way back in the day a few sessions in 2nd edition, but it didn't really go anywhere. And it just sort of fizzled out. And I think I was like 12 or 13. Mm-hmm. But then I started really getting into it with my friends here. And my DM is amazing. He's just a phenomenal storyteller. He's one of those guys that's been doing it for 35 years. He's been playing since, I think, 1st edition.
Damn.
Yeah, he's got a library full of just tons of role-playing books from every genre. He pretty much sticks to 2nd edition D&D still, but he has read just so much stuff that it's kind of hard to keep up with him sometimes. He's such a good storyteller.
That is fantastic. That's goals. Like for me personally, in 20 years, I want to be like that guy who has an entire room dedicated in his house to storing all his D&D stuff.
Yeah, he's got bookshelves and bookshelves and bookshelves. It's actually kind of crazy. His entire apartment is full of this stuff. So I started playing with him, and he encouraged me to DM, and so I did.
That's awesome. So do we want to go ahead and jump into the meat and potatoes of the show and start answering some questions?
I'm fine with that.
Nice. So our first one says, my players are in between big quests and coming up on a sleepy town where I want something weird to be happening in the background to draw them into a side quest of some sort. I've thought about folks being replaced by doppelgangers or something like that, but I feel like that's been done a bunch before. What's some spooky stuff I could have them stumble upon to make this town a bit more interesting than just a pit stop? And that's from the Bear Mage.
Vampires. Always vampires.
That is a good shorthand. That is like a good way to go. And there's a lot of different ways to go with vampires.
Yeah, vampires, I mean, that's like low-hanging fruit. It's pretty easy. Something I would do there that would be maybe fun, an idea I'd had in the past, was to have them being sort of poisoned, or not necessarily being taken control of, but there's parasites in the water there. And they're being put there by a Mindflayer. I mean,
that's a good way to go. Especially as Mindflayers are like, it's one of those ones where I feel like Mindflayer for being such an iconic monster for D&D, still I don't get the chance to use often enough. They don't come up often enough for players to instantly say, "Oh, spooky stuff's happening because of Mindflayers."
Yeah, that's literally the reason that I had this idea. Was I was looking in the monster manual and thought, I need more Mindflayers in my game. And so, like, you'll not be able to. It depends on the level of your party, right? So if they're 10th level or so, a Mind Flayer is a fun challenge still. But if you've got like 3rd or 4th level players going into this town that's being taken over by a Mind Flayer, I would maybe change it to be like a thrall of a Mind Flayer or something like that. Like someone that's partially taken over, but not completely Mind Flayery.
Yeah. Or it could even be like something like a lot of times I feel like a lot of things could be accomplished without even needing necessarily a monster. It could even be something like, one thing I actually did at one point in the past was it was a town that didn't actually have any people in it. It's just that all of the people were very convincing illusions made by a wizard to protect his kind of lair at the center of the town kind of thing.
Ooh, that's cool. So like hiding in plain sight wizard.
Yeah, or, or illusions or something else. It doesn't necessarily have to be the classic everyone's been brain taken. It could be something a little bit more a little less harmless, I guess. Something that would be interesting, but not necessarily, oh god, this town is corrupt and we have to deal with it kind of thing.
Yeah, we're going to have to fix all of this. Which is what makes, like, the vampire, going back to that one, so nice, because if you're having, like, a Mind Flayer and everybody's poisoned and all that, that's a really big problem to deal with. But if it's a vampire, you kill the vampire and everybody's fine.
Maybe they don't even know there was a vampire to begin with.
Yeah, they just know that all of a sudden everyone's getting sunburned really bad, and they don't realize that they're all thralls of the vampire because maybe the vampire is just sort of passively feeding on them.
I really like that idea of, like, vampirism, but, like, not malicious vampirism, just like everyone's just like, yeah, we've had this weird skin condition, and we have iron deficiency for some reason. We can't really figure it out. And
it's a weird toxin. Something, you know what? If you could mix both ideas, this Mind Flayer thing, they think there's a Mind Flayer in the water that's poisoning them, but really, it's a vampire that's just not necessarily evil, but he realizes that he's got to eat, right?
Or this could be the most this has just developed a character in my mind, which is now the town conspiracy theorist who actually turns out to be incredibly correct.
Absolutely. Yes. This is perfect, and I'm going to take this and use this idea.
That's
town
half
conspiracy
of what this
theorist. So
that's
good.
half of what this podcast is for, is to give me ideas to later steal for my D&D games. That is 80% of what this podcast is.
Well, you're doing a good job.
Thank you. But yeah, I would say there's like a million ways you could go about this there, but yeah, I think something that's not quite so, because they specifically said they wanted to avoid like the classic people being replaced and found in the middle of the night. Like, I feel like something maybe a little bit outside of the box and a little bit less of a massive threat to the town would be a bit more refreshing of a side quest than the classic everyone's been body snatched.
Yeah. And going back to your conspiracy theorist, one thing you could do here is that you could make up a bunch of crazy conspiracies that they tell all the time, and all of those could be totally true. Those could be their own little quests. Like, he's the quest board now. You just got to figure out what is he talking about.
Or or potentially this is the one that's true, but they have to figure out which ones are true and which ones aren't now, because some of them are and some of them very clearly aren't.
Yeah, but make the ones that very clearly aren't, those are the ones that actually are true. Yeah, there's actually just like a super peaceful vampire here, and he's just been feeding on people. Nobody's going to believe that.
Yep. Oh god, I love this whole scenario.
Yeah.
I feel like there's a lot of untapped potential of because I feel like so often there's always that little town that you stop in for a supply run or just because you need a place to go to between big places. And I feel like there's a lot of potential in those towns for some more lighthearted antics.
Yeah, it's time to get weird. You know, you don't
Yeah.
want to have all this happening when you're having your super deep political, like everything's heavy and super charged. You don't want to do all this weird stuff then. Now's the time to do it.
Indeed. So I think we answered that one pretty thoroughly. Let's go ahead and jump on to the next one. This one is pretty simple, and it's from Michael R., who asks, what house rules do you use at your table? So what are some, like, homebrew, some non-in-the-book rules that you generally implement in your games?
I hate the way that 5th edition takes care of criticals, and so because you have the ability, or there's the opportunity for you to roll a lower attack than you could potentially do with a normal attack. Like there's the potential to do less damage, and you just roll a 20. It needs to be cool. So
Yeah.
And I've put some of these house rules into the Retroverse just for people to use them because I feel like they make good sense. But a critical is automatically the max damage you can do with that weapon. So let's say you're wielding like a short sword, it's 1d6 plus whatever your dex modifier is, and then roll the d20 again. If it's 11 or higher, then you get to re-roll the damage dice. So
that's sweet. Yeah, no, I really like that system because, like you said, there's nothing worse than getting a crit and regardless rolling low damage.
Yeah, I rolled 2 1s on these 2d4s, and well, that sucks. You know, it's a waste of a crit. The other one I do is for failures, and this was just to allow people to get more agency within the story, especially during combat. If they roll a 1, then they roll percentile dice. And the lower the number, the easier it is. The higher the number, the worse it is. So if you roll like on percentile and you roll like a 5, well, you probably just drop your weapon. Maybe you trip over. Not a big deal. But if you roll 100, you're probably, it's likely that you're lucky to be alive. You've probably put your party at a disadvantageous, whatever, situation. And you've probably got like a status condition somewhere along the lines. But the thing about it is I let them decide how it happens. So if they roll 100, they know it's going to be really bad. And they know that if they don't make it bad enough, then I, as the GM, am going to step in and make sure that it actually is appropriate for that number. But on top of all that, if I roll a 1, say I have a goblin and I roll a 1, then I'll roll the percentile dice in front of them, and then they get to choose what happens as well there.
I really like that system. That, A, gets them involved in a little bit of the narrative, and B, kind of solves the problem that I had with, fumbles and stuff like that in previous versions of D&D or homebrewed versions, where, like, I didn't necessarily like that I have a 1 in 20 chance of potentially cutting off my own head with, like a longsword or something. But this allows you to have you and the players kind of workshop something that's actually appropriate for what would happen in the story and what's happening in combat.
Yeah, it makes it more fair, I feel like. And especially because it's not just you. Like when you roll a 50, yeah, you know it's bad. But you know that goblin, when it rolls a 50, it's also going to be bad for it. So it keeps it on a level playing field, right?
Yeah, I like that. I'm probably going to steal that.
You can have it.
One that I do is that, well, I mean, I feel like a lot of progressing as a DM is just kind of getting this collection of homebrew rules.
Yeah, taking someone else's ideas.
Yeah, because like half of mine, like I like the bonus action potions are stolen from a bunch of different people. I say that taking a potion rather than feeding it to someone is a bonus action because it just kind of works out better in 5e, especially with how kind of potions are mostly used as last resort healing in 5e.
Yeah.
It's they don't do too much, but they get people back up from the brink. So that's one I've used. Another one that I've stolen from somewhere online was, I have players do death, saving rolls behind the DM screen so that the other players don't know whether or how poorly the other player's doing.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, it adds a lot more suspense. It prevents them from knowing whether they're too late or not. There's always a potential for getting to the body and realizing that they're too late. or something to that effect. And so that I always have death saves rolled behind the screen, or if it's online, doing it in private chat. And there was another that I don't personally use, but I have a friend who uses it, who I've played in their games before, which I haven't used too much, but I might at some point, just because I think it's a neat rule. And that's for critting on initiative, both crit success and crit fails. Is they have it so that if you crit fail on initiative, you have disadvantage for your first action, and if you crit success, then you have advantage for your first action. So that kind of like means that it gets rid of that feeling of, oh, I wasted a crit on initiative, when, you know, it adds a bit more to that. So those are some.
That's not bad at all. I like that a lot.
Yeah, so there's a million different homebrew rules that you kind of forget are homebrew over time, but
yeah, it's like, no, this is just the way the game goes.
Yep.
This is how it's supposed to be played.
I mean, especially with 5e, that's kind of how it's written. It's supposed to really be open for DMs to customize the game how their game is run, as opposed to another DM's.
Yeah, we've tried to write that into the Retroverse as well. Like the very opening paragraph has something about like the rule of cool being the only hard rule within the game.
Perfect.
Yeah, I think it's important.
That is my kind of rule. But yeah, I'm trying to think of any others. I'm drawing a blank on any other like homebrew rules I use consistently.
Yeah, that's the thing is you make callings all the time, but which are the ones that actually stick?
Yeah, the only, I think it goes from being a calling to being a homebrew rule the second you have to write it down at the beginning of a campaign. That's when it becomes an actual homebrew rule.
So the homebrew rule I have for homebrew rules is if somebody wants to use my idea, so if you want to use this idea for the critical roles and failures, all I ever ask is that you name an NPC in your world Snickle Socks.
That is easily done. There are plenty of gnomes.
Yes. At this point, I think there's about like 60 Snickle Sockses out there in the multiverse.
Excellent. That's just going to become the new Dungeon Master currency, that we that we name characters after our handles, and then that's his fair payment for stealing an idea.
I feel like it's totally fair payment.
Although I just realized how many goddamn characters I'm going to have to name either Matthew Mercer or Matt Coville. Like,
yeah. I do use his "how do you want to do this" rule when we're doing something cool.
Oh yeah, that's another example of a homebrew rule. I think I use it pretty much for every game I do. Is the famous "how do you want to do this?" And I feel like that's kind of become an unspoken rule. Like, that's become so common that I see it more often than not.
Yeah, everybody knows this one. Just use it. It's in the Dungeon Master's Guide. It's one of those pages.
Trust me, it's in there. It's page. It's either page 69 or 420. I can never remember which.
Yeah, it's one or the other. Keep looking.
But yeah, and that's one of those things where, hey, if you guys have fun, home rules or homebrew rules you use at your tables, send those to us at Twitter. I'd like to read them and because there's always more to steal.
Yeah.
So I think it's time that we jump ahead to our fun little game that we do at the middle of the show here, where we're going to create some characters. Chris, do you have a D20 ready?
I do. It's a very unlucky one, but I have it.
That's fine. Any character is a good character here, even if they're not very lucky. So what we do here, if you haven't listened to the show before, is I have made some tables of random character building for race, background, profession, and character quirk. And we'll roll up some interesting characters, and those creative types of you listening at home can send in either art or a bio or a short story, and we go through those every week. We had some fantastic submissions for our Goliath Tinkerer Investigator, who gets confused by big words. As per usual, Travis Mattingly had a fantastic take on the character. We had some wonderful art sent in by Bex on Twitter, and a fantastic short story written by Hazel de Basil. That'll also all be retweeted by us. They're fantastic. Please go check them out. But yeah, are we ready to roll up some characters for this week?
Yeah, let's go for it.
Awesome. So the first roll is going to be for race.
All right. 1. I told you this is a bad dice.
You did. We're off to a good start. That's human is the 1.
All right. Let's keep going.
All right. Profession.
16.
16 is craft person. So
Okay.
that's pretty open. Just someone who crafts things.
12.
Then 12 for background is sage. All right. Okay.
Yeah.
This is a little bit coherent, but let's mess it up with a character quirk.
7.
7 always seems to have plans for any contingency, no matter how unlikely.
I feel like we might be getting to the conspiracy theorist character here.
I feel like I definitely think so. Just the local craftsperson who just every time you make a purchase says, "By the way, you know about the Mindflayers in the water, right?"
Yeah, you know about the water. Don't drink the water.
I have 3 different filters I built this week. This one is most effective at filtering Mindflayers. Let's start another one with another race roll.
20.
20 is Triton, so we got a fish person in the mix.
Okay, fun.
Then profession.
11.
11 is sorcerer.
Okay, I'm liking this.
Yes, then background.
7.
7 is guild merchant. Okay, so kind of a fish magic item salesman potentially. And then we got the quirk.
20.
Is nudist.
All right, cool.
So we've got a nudist fish person, guild merchant who is also a sorcerer. That has potential. That definitely has potential. I'm almost imagining like Legend of Zelda style Zora person who just didn't quite realize that people need to wear pants on the surface.
Yeah, his god is one of like those. He's like Dagon or something like that. That's his patron deity, and he doesn't have any understanding of what you're supposed to do. Like this thing keeps whispering into his head and just keeps telling him to sell all these rubies and pearls that Dagon gave him. Clothes, what are those?
Wonderful. That is wonderful. So let's go ahead and make one more, and then we can make our decision on who's our favorite.
19.
19 is Tabaxi.
Okay, I like Tabaxi.
Indeed.
13.
Baker.
All right, cool.
We got a cat person, bread smith, I guess.
Brett Smith. 4.
4 is entertainer.
Okay. All right.
And then the character quirk.
9.
9. Short and envies those who are tall.
Oh yeah. So we've got a Tabaxi here. They're entertainer, big fan of bread. So they probably are like they make, I imagine, a bunch of cakes and that sort of thing.
Yeah, like decorative party cakes.
Yeah, and maybe they make it so that they can get in there and then pop out and then do flips and stuff.
I really like this character as well. Just the small cat person who makes cakes and attends parties.
Yeah, but they refuse to make cakes or anything for anybody over like 5 feet. They're like, nah, I'm not doing it.
Or just gives them severe side-eye anytime a particular tall person comes into the shop.
Oh, you want a tall cake? Well, that's going to be double.
Well, you have to factor in the cost of the ladder to make the cake.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry about that, buddy.
Bigger people need bigger cakes. So if you want a bigger cake, I'm sorry, but I make cakes for normal-sized people.
I love yet another character I am 100% using in my campaign. But yeah, so I'll leave the decision up to you. Who do you think we should choose for this week's favorite child? Either the cat baker, who is short and angry about it, the sorcerer guild merchant fish person who hasn't gotten the concept of clothes, or the human craftsperson who is a little bit over prepared for every scenario.
Yeah, as much as I love sorcerers and that sort of thing, I'm just going to have to cut that one out immediately.
Yeah,
It just doesn't rate compared to these other two.
indeed. I agree.
But these other two are both really good. In their own ways, they're both really special.
Yeah, both. One is very wholesome. One is a very lovely character that I can imagine in almost a Ghibli style movie, and the other is my favorite crazy person to play in the campaign.
See, and the thing is you can't tell the difference between which one is which. Those descriptors work for both of those characters.
That is true.
So I don't know, man. Like I would run both of these. I would have both of these as characters. Like the paranoid guy who's telling you that there's mind flare parasites in the water. That guy I would actually have as probably like a recurring NPC, one that comes around and gives quests, and maybe I'd make them like my shopkeep, that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. And then the cat person is potentially a quest giver who, if their shop had been beset by bread-eating bandits.
Yes, or like I probably would put them in the middle of, let's say, like a royal ball or something, some sort of big event. And
Yes.
they're there arguing about like the size of the cake, and they can start out as window dressing, but I bet you that
The players will engage in that, yeah.
Oh, absolutely. They'll become a favorite NPC.
Maybe it's a heist kind of session, and they have to figure out how to get inside of one of the cakes.
Absolutely.
Oh, God. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and make an executive decision because this is my podcast. We're not choosing one this week. We're choosing two, and those are going to be the two that we choose.
They're both great.
They are both very good. So if you are inspired by either the cat person baker entertainer who is short and a little bit resentful about it, or the human craftsperson, I forget what you did for background. I think it was Sage, yeah. So the human craftsperson Sage, who is overprepared for every scenario. If either one of those inspire you to either write a short story or make some fan art, I love to see those. Please submit those either to us on Twitter at DearDMPodcast, to our email at deardm.submit@gmail.com, or on the Dear DM Discord channel, on the Nerdsmith Discord channel. And those absolutely make my week every week. It's my favorite part of this gig. So please send those in. But now, I think now that we have some wonderful characters created, it's time to jump back into the questions.
That was fun. I really like that segment. I might steal that.
Yeah, absolutely. But you have to name something after me.
Okay, of course.
That's the deal. But yeah,
I understand.
It is my favorite part. It is every time there's something wonderful that comes out of it. But our next question is going to be, I had my first TPK while running a game last night, and it was entirely unintentional. I may have screwed up and given them an encounter that was too difficult with no means of retreat. While I usually try not to go easy on my players, this happened just as the story was really picking up momentum, and everyone, myself included, kinda wishes there was a way to keep playing this story. Would it be absolutely horrible for me to retcon this? And that's from DM Casey.
It depends on the TPK, really, like what are the situation around it. Because if it was something like you all got burnt up in a fiery inferno and now you're totally super dead, it's hard to get out of that. The other thing, what you could do is you could, if they're not completely dead, you could make it like a prisoner scenario. That's a pretty easy way out of a TPK if you've done it with like goblins or hobgoblins or something like that. It really depends on, you don't want to do the whole like it was just a dream scenario, because that's lame.
Yeah. That's just straight up saying, yeah, we didn't want that to happen, so it's not going to happen. Kind of thing.
You could always have them come into contact, or now they come into contact with a necromancer of great power who needs a favor from them, and work that back into the story somehow to where they're all brought back to life. But at this point, if they don't do what he says and they don't find a way away from his power, he could just cut off that line of energy at any point in time. And so they're dead again.
Yeah, I like, that is the one thing that I would say in this scenario has to track is no matter what you do, there still has to be a consequence for them dying.
Yeah.
It can't be it turned out all right anyways. You just wake up and everything's all fine. It needs to be either there's a new worse situation they have to get out of, or they owe a debt to someone. Potentially if this is one thing where I'd honestly call in some things of the party. If there is either a cleric or a warlock or a paladin, this might be a good time for a deity to step in and then immediately demand a favor, especially a warlock patron that would be very in character for. It really does depend, like you said, so much of this depends on the scenario. And that's kind of why I like talking with folks in our new Discord channel, because I get to like go more in depth and stuff like this and ask follow-up questions and stuff. But for the purposes of this, I would say my general, depending on the scenario, either a resurrection with a cost, or if there was any way it could have ended in unconsciousness rather than everyone, like you said, being burned up. There's other things that could happen. You could have an ally save them, but they were in the process kidnapped or something to that effect. There's a lot of ways to go with it, but as long as there's a consequence for them having been TPK'd, then it's a bit less unsavory than if you just fully retcon it.
Yeah, don't go back and just retcon the whole thing, because that kind of sucks. Nobody likes that. Everybody feels sort of like cheated, and they're probably already feeling a little down after having an unexpected TPK, which does happen. Mm-hmm. I mean, it happens to the best of us.
And it's one of those things where it's almost even more, it's even less the fact of, oh, they got cheated out of, or it feels wrong. It then, for the rest of the game, it sets up this horrible precedent that the danger's not real. And that can destroy a game. Like, all of a sudden they know that no matter what they do, they have plot armor, and it kind of ruins the stakes. So whatever you do, don't just let it slide. But if you really want to continue playing the story on the path it was headed, there's definitely ways to get back to that.
Yeah, I would, if it were me, I would definitely go with like the necromancer route of they get brought back. Deities is one thing, but like I try to take those tropes and turn them on their heads, and I'd much rather all of the lawful good characters be brought back by pure evil and see how they handle that, knowing that if they don't do what this guy says, they're going to die anyway, and they're being kept alive by necrotic energy. That really can mess with like a lawful good paladin for sure.
Oh yeah, and there's always the fact of depending on the alignments of the party and the what level they're at, there's always an opportunity for an excursion to the Nine Hells. There's always you died, you're here now, but here's this opportunity to escape kind of thing.
That's totally right. Like, you could just start off the campaign with like, all right, you're in your spiritual form now and you're in hell to figure it out.
Yeah. Yep, there's a lot of ways to go about it.
And maybe they get through that. It would be really cool is if they get into the Nine Hells, and then by the time they leave, they've got brand new bodies. They're the same people, but they're not the same people. That would add a lot of that would add a lot of role playing opportunities for your characters.
Yeah, essentially use reincarnation, the spell, to kind of you could potentially use that as a kind of punishment. Well, you're back, but you're also a female dwarf this time, and you don't know how.
Yeah.
Or, or you're a kobold now. How do you deal with this?
Yeah. But then give them the opportunity to be able to actually get their bodies back. But that is its own quest as well.
Absolutely. But yeah, I think we gave a couple different ways to get out of that one. So we're going to go ahead and jump to the last question for the day. And that is, I want to make my own homebrew setting. But every time I start one, I feel like I'm just reskinning the Forgotten Realms with new names and characters. How do I make a world that actually feels unique? And that's from Dr. Orc.
Steal.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Go play your favorite video game or book, and then just take a bunch of parts of that, and then go play another video game, read a book, or watch a movie, and then take some more parts of that, and then throw that together.
100% yes. So much of it is built off of the media. I think we actually talked a little bit about this last week briefly, but like so much of it is based off of the media you consume. Like, the reason why a lot of folks when they start doing homebrew stuff, it just feels like Forgotten Realms with different names, is because that's the only D&D they've played and the only like kind of fantasy saying they know to apply to D&D. If you read or even potentially just listen to find out about other D&D settings other than Forgotten Realms and steal from those. I know I've stolen a good amount from one of my favorite podcasts right now is the God's Fall podcast. And the Vartian, the DM for that, his world building is absolutely wonderful, and not once did it make me ever think about Forgotten Realms, even though it's basically mechanically 5e. It's such a unique setting that you don't think about it, and that just comes from listening to other and stealing from other media.
Yeah, it's a super simple thing to do, and you can find a lot of good inspiration in stuff that's already fantasy, but you can find a lot of great inspiration in things that are not fantasy. If you want your stuff to start getting weird, read some sci-fi, play some action video games that are in like a modern setting. You know, read some books, read some love novels. You know, like there's tons of stuff out there that you can pull from. That it doesn't all have to be fantasy, but you can fantasize it.
Mm-hmm. And that it just goes, it's just the old fact of there's so much to storytelling that is literally the same stories over and over again in different settings and with different characters that applies to D&D, because, you know, Star Wars is basically an identical theme to the hero story, which has been told a million different ways, but because there's laser swords and spaceships and everything like that, all of a sudden it feels entirely new, and you can do basically the same thing with D&D. You can just reskin it in a way that while you're reskinning it, it feels entirely new.
Yeah. Just take some stuff, mash it up together, and you'll be fine.
Essentially.
That's the best way that I've found. Like my world, my like fantasy world when I'm running stuff is highly based around the Chrono Cross and Chrono Trigger games. Just because like they're fantasy, yeah, but they're also not in a lot of ways. And I like that very open and like fresh feeling that it brings to the world. That's the way that I went, just because those are some of my favorite games, and I thought if I'm going to make a world, I'm going to make it something I really enjoy. Also, I guess that's the other part of that: make it something that you would enjoy playing.
So yeah, I think that's going to do it for us here at Dear DM for today. Before we go, I just wanted to remind everyone to please send your questions either to our Twitter account at Dear DM Podcast or in an email to deardm.submit@gmail.com. The more questions we get, the more content we can produce for all you lovely people, and the happier I'll be. If you've been enjoying the podcast so far, it would mean the world to us if you could please share it with your friends or give us a review on iTunes. That will all go directly to our power stores, and we will gain powder and become mightier than you could possibly imagine via those reviews. As always, I want to thank my dear friend Paul Parisa for the use of his song Whether or Not as our opening and outro music. And as always, I want to thank all the folks at Nerdsmith for welcoming us into the network. It's all lovely folks, and you should check out everything we do at www.nerdsmith.org. And finally, as I promised, for that big announcement we teased at the beginning, I am excited to say that on our very next episode, I will be sitting down with the one and only Matthew Mercer, legendary DM of Critical Role and award-winning voice actor. Trust me, I'm as surprised as you are. But that will be airing on April 24th, so make sure you get those questions submitted to us, because you never know who might be answering them. But I would of course love to thank you so much, Chris, for joining me. It's been a ton of fun talking with you. And I'm so excited for the, Retroverse stuff to come out, today.
Yeah.
Or some more info on about it. Where can folks find all the info for the Kickstarter and all the info for the Retroverse?
So you'll probably be able to just find the Kickstarter. If everything's gone right, you'll know about the Kickstarter already. If not, go to lasersandliches.com. But yeah, lasersandliches.com will have everything that you need on it. Again, you can follow me on Twitter at @Snicklesocks, and that will, you'll find all the information you need there as well, because I'll either be tweeting about it a ton when this is released, or I will not be tweeting about it at all. I'm not quite sure which one is going to be better, but we're going to have one or the other is going to happen.
one way or the other. But I'm super pumped for it. And so we always like to close out the show with a game story. So, Chris, do you have a particularly fun anecdote from your table you'd like to share?
Yeah. So let's see. The most recent thing that I was able to do with some of my players, I've had to take a step back to work on this project for a little bit. So I haven't run a game in a little while, beyond some promotional stuff. But the last session that we had, it started off with combat that we had left on a cliffhanger for the last one. They had been told that these they needed to do some blight extermination. And there were wood blights at the edge of the town because they were trying to grow this big city, but every time that the workers went out into the forest to try and cut down trees, they were being attacked by the blights, right? And so when they get there, and they get to like the source of all this power, where all it's coming from, and there's some dryads there that are like, "Hey, we're not leaving. You've pushed us too far back already. This is our home, and you know we're not gonna let you kill us." And so there was a big debate about whether or not it was right for these adventurers to remove the blights and remove the dryads, and because the dryads weren't going to move, and the dryads were trying to use charm person to convince the players to then go attack the city instead of attacking them. Which was a fun thing. Most everybody made their save, except for one person who was super on the dryad side for a while. Eventually, they decided that they weren't going to fall back. They were going to have to take out these dryads. They were going to have to take out the blight infestation because they were also sort of beholden to the king of the city. It had something to do with some collars and explosives around some of the players' necks. I won't mention how many, but a few of them. So that next session starts off with them going up against their champion, which was a woodwode and a triceratops that had a disease that I like to call wood rot. But it's basically zombified triceratops and a woodwode, and I think 4 dryads and almost 30 blights. It was insane. It was a huge combat thing. And I had them roll on the random encounter table to see what they were going to fight in this fight. So it was their fault that they were fighting so much stuff. It wasn't my fault. I didn't do it.
That is the ultimate DM motto, in my opinion.
Yeah.
It's the dice fault. It's your guys' fault. I'm just running this shit.
Yeah. So it ended. They ended up killing some stuff. Well, one of the players died because they, I don't know, summoned lightning from the sky while it was the Triceratops was standing on top of one of the players. And so I asked them, "How does electricity work?"
Yeah.
Yeah. So the last thing from that, and because I don't like to have any sort of combat situation that doesn't end with some sort of repercussions, and so since this was such a big one, the Dryads spent their whole all the time that they were alive trying to cast to curse these players with wood rot. And what wood rot does is it turns your skin into bark, slowly but surely, and eventually you end up in a cocoon of bark that was made of your skin. You're skinless and you're bleeding to death, and eventually you suffocate in a cocoon that was made of your skin. So it's a bad disease.
Yeah, it sounds pretty bad.
It's pretty terrible, and it's also something that you can't just cure with like a remove curse. You need some stuff to get this off of you.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's where we sort of ended. They have some things they've got to do when I get back to DMing.
Yeah, that's I as horrifying as it is, I really like that idea of the wood rot disease. That's, again, I'll have to name multiple characters after you because I'm going to be stealing a lot.
There's plenty of goblins and dwarves and stuff. That's fine.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining me, Chris. I'd love to have you again sometime so I can steal more of your ideas.
Absolutely. I'd love to come again.
Awesome. So for now, that's going to be it for us here on Dear DM. And as always, I don't actually have a catchphrase to close out the show. So for now, goodbye.
I say stay safe in your brain, because it's a dangerous place out there.
That works too.
Hello, fans of Critical Role. Do you mean to make your music more melodious? Do you seek to sing like Scanlan Shorthalt? Well, look no further than Crosswords, a new video series from the creator of the Critical Role Hamilton mashup album. And also this song. Crosswords with Will Crossway. Advice and analysis for the musician at the gaming table. Available on nerdsmith.org or wherever you watch your YouTube videos. YouTube, right? Probably YouTube.